So I'm sure that a few more people will trickle in. Before I get started by sharing my screen, just to give you a little bit of a layout of what's going to happen over the next hour. For the first part of this, maybe for the first 45 or 50 minutes, me, Paul, and Michelle, who I'll introduce in just a moment, are mainly going to present some new features that we've been working on at Pathwright. We will have a time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to jot down any questions that you've got. You can pop them in the chat, and we'll try to go back and remember them, but there will be a time for Q&A at the end, so if you want to save your questions for us, that's fantastic. I'm really excited to see you all here. This feels like a little bit of a reunion of sorts. I don't think that we've had so many Pathwright users in one place for a while. And I'm very excited to share what we're going to share today. To give you a little bit of background, if you've hung around Pathwright for a while, you know that we not only like to do our work, but we like to think about how we do our work. So at the end of 2020, we came up with this idea to kind of work in seasons, kind of rhythms around how you launch courses in your school, and some rhythms for how we've just found that as a team we work best. And each of these seasons is going to have a theme. So this is the very first one and the very first season premiere. And it's all been structured around the idea of cohorts. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in just a few moments. Paul and I are going to talk about what definitions are, but very likely, just in general, you've felt more loneliness and isolation in the past year than maybe in a long time. I know I have. And oddly, the internet has sometimes come to the rescue to make us feel a little bit less lonely. That hasn't always been the case when it comes to online learning, though. Often online learning environments feel like some of the loneliest environments. They feel like aggregations of content. They feel like you're just roaming the halls of a library on your own without a guide to help you. It kind of just feels like everybody's isolated on their own little journey. Our goal for this season 1 premiere is to bring us together so that we can finally learn together. I think if you reflect back on some of your best experiences in education, whether it's in grade school, high school, college, grad school, adult learning, whatever it might be, if I had you write out, reflect on some of the best experiences, I doubt you'd just give me the title of a lecture or lecture content. Very likely you had some interaction with a teacher or some interaction with a classmate that really sparked for you the importance of what you're learning. That's the goal and mission of what we're going to share with you today. How can we create learning communities so that we thrive and learn best together? How can we put community back at the forefront of learning, especially in the online world? So I'll stop waxing eloquent. I want to introduce my other panelists. By the way, I'm Christian. I've been at Pathwright for 7 years now, primarily designing courses. Some of you may know, around the start of the pandemic, we started this thing called Ed Labs that I now lead up, which are these collaborative one-on-one design sessions where you and I get to figure out how we can teach best, how we can teach in the most human ways online. We'll say more about those Ed Lab sessions a little bit later. They're available to all of you. But for now, let me introduce Michelle, who many of you know as really probably the first person that you meet at Pathwright. Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm Pathwright's Chief Happiness Officer. And so I primarily give demos of Pathwright and help people figure out what their goals are and how they can accomplish that with Pathwright. So I've seen a lot of you, so nice to see you all again.
Awesome. And Paul?
Hey, I'm Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of Pathwright, along with my twin. So if you see somebody that looks just like me, that may or may not be me. But we started Pathwright in around 2009 and have been growing it ever since. And the thing that I get really excited about is just imagining the future of our product and talking with forward-thinking creative educators and figuring out how we can make Pathwright a better tool for you. And so I'm excited to share what we've been up to with you all today.
On that note, let's go ahead and dive in. Paul, you want to share your screen and we'll get to the good stuff?
All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share this screen that should be a little bit more clear here. But we have got our season Path up. And Christian, do you want to say just maybe like a brief kind of overview of like why we chose to do a season? And then we can talk about what we'll show.
Yeah. So instead of primarily focusing on just one feature, the season allows us to focus on a set of features or an idea in online learning. So we're not just going to show you one feature today. We're actually going to show you maybe 5 or 6 that all kind of blend together in this theme. Another big thing I want to point out is that these season premieres, again, this is the first of more to come. These season premieres are really starting lines. They're not finish lines. So we're going to show you some stuff today. And over the next few months, we're only going to be improving on these features, adding more to them. So we won't move on from this idea of cohorts and community for a while. This is the starting line, and it's the time when we get to invite you into what we've made, hear how you're using it, use it with you, and make it hopefully even better for you. So let's go ahead and start, Paul, with this idea, the new cohort feature that with new in big air quotes there.
Yep. Yeah, we refer to cohorts sometimes as our worst kept secret, because if you're not on a complete plan or enterprise plan or some kind of special plan, you may not even know that cohorts are in Pathwright, but they are. And in fact, there's been over 156,000 cohorts since we launched.
That's incredible.
And we've had them for about 10 years, but we just have never launched them publicly on all plans. And so that is what we're mostly excited to do today.
Yes, but community, I'm really excited about these.
Yep. So we've got some community features to show, and then just some other improvements, which, like Christian said, are along the same theme of cohorts and community and learning together online.
Let's, before we dive into these features, let's just lay out some, if you want, difference in our minds at Pathwright between how we think about a course and how we think about a cohort.
Yeah, that's a good, there is a distinction that we have in mind, I'm sure you're aware, but I would be curious to hear from the chat, how would you all define the difference between a course or a cohort?
Yeah, let's get your 1-sentence definitions. What's the difference between a course and a cohort? Feel free to chat in. We've got our eyeballs on it. There are no wrong answers. Yeah, so now we've got some good ones coming in. Let's see. John says a cohort is a particular group of people taking a course together. Liam, a course is content. A cohort is a group. That's really good. Sandy, a course is the main event and the cohort is the sideshow. That's interesting.
I like that framing.
Cohort is a group of people taking a course together. Oh, I like this. Cohort equals a class plus a course. That's a nice framing, Skipper.
Yeah, we're getting some great answers here. So yeah, and I think all of those are really in line with the way that we tend to think about it too. And so
Paul, one more. I just want to highlight Brian's, because Brian maybe has the most technical Pathwright answer, that a cohort is the master or source version, or a course is the master source version and a cohort is an instance. Thanks for that, Brian. You get Pathwright.
Yes, exactly how it works. Yep. How Brian has used cohorts. So broadly speaking, though, a course is what we would view as the designed content. It's like the curriculum that guides people through knowledge and skill, but it's not inherently relational. It's very content-centric and content-based. And then a cohort, as you all are saying, that's a bunch of people moving through a learning journey together. And they use content, but really it's about the relationship in the togetherness. And so cohorts and courses really are these different things, but they tend to get a little confused, especially when it comes to online learning.
Yeah, so much of online learning has been focused on that course piece, the design content, and not necessarily the cohort around it, which, as someone said, kind of ends up taking on a life of its own. Let's go ahead and dive in, Michelle, to maybe some of the redesigned way of Pathwright, a redesign that emphasizes this idea of a community of learners. Do we want to dive in?
Let's do it. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So first of all, this is now the new home screen. And as you can see right now, I am currently on my Learn tab. So as an administrator, I could actually have something that I am learning. In this instance, I am actually learning something that Christian has been creating, that is how to teach with cohorts. And as you can see right now, I am currently on my Learn tab. So as an administrator, I could actually have something that I am learning. In this instance, I am actually learning something that Christian has been creating, that is how to teach with cohorts. and I can click into this to see this course that I am taking to learn. And so right here, you can see I can actually work through this, even though I'm an admin in my account. So let's go over some examples of that.
Yeah, I like, let's go back to that home screen, Michelle, because one of the new things in Pathwright is that these three different personas are emphasized a little bit more. If you've used Pathwright for a while, you know on your home screen, you've got these different tabs, right? Very likely you found yourself living in one tab or the other. You kind of live on that teach tab or you live on that design tab, but maybe you don't really pass between them much at all. This new design is really meant to emphasize the benefits of these different personas. So as Michelle's saying, you can have a course that you're taking as an administrator, or for instance, Michelle, maybe if we had a group of teachers who teach all the courses, all the paths in our Pathwright library, we could have them take a custom made teacher guide for how we want moderation and teaching to happen in our school.
That's a great example. And we actually, a lot of you have that in your Pathwright accounts, and you do assign that for the other teachers there. Another example would be if, let's say, one of the teachers that you have who've built out a course, you actually want to take that course as a learner.
Yeah.
So you could have that course on your Learn tab just to learn from your own teachers. So I can easily keep track of that here. And also you can see I can adjust my profile settings here too. So while we're on this is a lot bigger of a profile picture. So maybe upload one that you really enjoy and love to see.
Yeah, in the past, you probably noticed that those profile settings were a little bit hidden. We've put them more in the foreground here for, well, I won't spoil it. We've got something coming later that will make a lot more sense of why that's in the foreground. Maybe just another thing to notice too, as we flip to the design tab, we've also got this new search up in the top right-hand corner, which is really handy.
So some of the accounts that are on Pathwright have like multiple courses that they are offering. One account has well over 100. And so if they're trying to find a course that they want to work on redesigning, they could just very easily pull up that search tab and find it. And one thing you'll notice about this page is that I have the paths that I am working on and I am designing, but then down below are the other paths that other teachers in my account are also working on and building.
Paul, I want to tag you in here. Can you tell me a little bit about why these, if you look at Pathwright in the past as it exists right now, as what's live, really there's not a lot of differentiation between how paths or cohorts or these different elements look whenever you're in these different tabs. But now, Michelle, if you don't mind just flipping back to Learn for me. So if you flip between Learn and then back to Design, you'll notice that these elements look a lot different. Why did we do that, Paul?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a kind of a detailed thing that's subtle, but I think it makes a difference, which is when we're thinking about content, so like a course, which is designing great content, then it just helps a little bit to visualize that more like content, like an album cover or a video thumbnail. And so that's why in this view, the same course looks a little bit different than when Michelle sees it on her Learn tab, which then it looks a little bit more actionable. That's something I might complete. It has a progress bar. But I think the really cool new visualization is actually on the Teach tab.
Yeah, real quick before we move on, I do just want to give a quick definition for that design tab, because this might actually be a new area in your Pathwright account for some people out there. You might not have seen a design tab before. This design tab is where you create paths that either you want to teach in multiple ways, or you can create a path that you want other people to teach. So again, like Paul was saying, it's where you create that kind of big idea, that curated content, right? That you're then going to offer and teach in multiple ways, which I think leads us really well into that Teach tab.
It does. So in this Teach tab, this is my now teacher dashboard. And one of the things that you will see on here is that I have two basic categories. I have my in progress cohorts that I am currently teaching. And then there's this new section down here. That's my completed cohorts. So this one is a 1984 IT training group. Obviously that one should not, that's not active. That's a long time ago. But another thing that you'll notice on here is that this is now showing me that these cohorts are with groups of people that are working through this together. So on this 2021 sales team, these are the people that are part of that cohort. So whenever I'm on this page, this is where I can tell these are the rooms. These are the areas that have the people that I'm actually teaching.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Michelle. Something that we've tried to do in this new iteration of Pathwright, honestly, I've been saying for the last few weeks, it kind of feels like a Pathwright 3 to me, is we've tried to emphasize the placiness, if I can make up a word, of online learning. Very often places or the internet doesn't really feel like it has a place, right? We've tried to emphasize that these are different environments that we can interact with. These are different rooms that we can hop into. And when we hop into a particular room, we're not just doing that alone, we're actually doing that with a group of people who we get to learn together with. So Michelle, let's say that I wanted to create a cohort to teach.
All right, let's click on plus a new cohort. So now you can see automatically, it actually pulls up right away the courses that I have already created. So that way I could say, you know, I'm going to do the one on how to teach with cohorts. I could choose that one. Now, I currently do not need to choose one of these options. I want to start with a brand new course. And this is new. You could actually do this right here on the Teach tab.
Yeah, I like this a lot because you'll notice a shift throughout a lot of what we're showing you, moving from a content forward approach to an approach that still appreciates good teaching content, but doesn't make it the star of the show, if you will, because actually there's a lot more happening. What matters most is, even if I'm teaching something old, is creating a new environment for my learner. But let's just say that I want to start off, I don't know if any of you have a pandemic hobby. My pandemic hobby is leatherworking. I've been making tons of stuff out of leather, like tote bags and computer cases and wallets and all this kind of stuff. So let's say I wanted to do like a summer cohort on how to make a leather wallet. We'll just call this our summer crew.
And one thing that you'll notice already is we're building this course on making a leather wallet while already keeping in mind who that first set of learners is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really meant to shorten the distance between this idea that I have for what I want to teach and the people who I'm actually going to interact with. So we won't spend a ton of time on content here. I do want to point out one thing. You'll notice that in the left-hand corner there, we've got these two different toggles. We've got teach and we've got design. That was previously edit, but we've changed that word to design so that there's a little bit more consistency in that kind of mode that you're flipping into whenever you're building or redesigning content.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of steps to this just so we can show a few things a little later on.
Awesome.
So I'm going to add in a step for Christian to say, introduce who in the world he is, and also maybe showcase his leatherworking workshop. So we'll do this one, post this. And as you can see, you're already used to this. Once I've added this content, I can publish it and then just keep going. So I also added in what is leather. And I think this is where we'll keep this. All right. So we've done that and started building this.
Cool. Now, let's actually hop back maybe to our home screen. We'll just leave that course there for now. And let's talk about switching between different cohorts.
Great. Okay, so if I go to, let's say I'm going to teach, and I've noticed, first of all, that I have all these different cohorts on here. Let's switch on this one. And now it's a lot easier than it has been before to switch very easily between the multiple cohorts that are part of this. And so I could go to my 2021 sales team right here, or switch back to this one.
We've tried to keep that kind of room-like environment. So when you're switching between cohorts, it's no longer just a list of cohorts that I'm going to switch in between. Actually, it's this more kind of interactive and, if I can use the word, vibrant way of switching between these different rooms and these different groups of learners. You'll also notice that we've got a couple of new options up there in the top corner with manage and new. So even from this menu, we could create a new cohort.
There we go. The other thing too is like this also feels a lot more alive just because when I'm scrolling over this, it's literally moving. So you can easily be able to identify which one you're moving to, but also manage those right there too.
Yep.
And one note there too is that those will only show the in progress cohort. So now that you can mark a cohort as complete, which it kind of moves it out of the main view because that's not one you're likely to be switching to. Now you can go to the manage cohort screen and you can see all of them, including the ones that are marked as complete, but you will only see the ones that are actually in progress in that switcher. So it makes it a lot easier if you're teaching multiple cohorts at once.
Yeah,
And I
Michelle, can
forgot
you
to
just
show.
show us how easy it is to complete a cohort?
If I go to Teach tab right here and Pilot, this is where I can mark that complete, and it will then move it. And you can see right here, it's going to move all the learners in that to observer role. And so I can just say that one is done. I no longer need to see it or get notifications from it. So we're going to confirm that's complete. And now that's down here. And instead I can just focus on these active ones right here.
Okay, so now let's maybe jump into a little bit more around the philosophy of cohorts, if you will. So what we call our 3 pillars of cohorts.
You can also see this on Paul's screen as well. So the 3, there we go. All right, so 3 pillars. The first one is accountability. So Christian, what does that mean? And how does that relate to Pathwright?
Yeah, accountability, especially with adult learners, is often kind of a no-no word. Adult learners don't like hearing about accountability, but really all we mean whenever we say accountability is this kind of benevolent cycle of noticing and connecting with our learner. So we're not going to go into all of these features right now because you're probably very familiar with them. But we hope that this shift toward cohort features and maybe more importantly, a cohort mindset makes it a little bit more clear why we have some of these features. So really this top row of features here, roles, radar, and inbox, are about helping us to notice how our cohort is doing. So for radar, for instance, I can see where learners are lumped together in a particular course, and I can make decisions based on that. I can notice and read the kind of things that they're submitting so I can gauge how well they're connecting, but I can also connect with them. And this is a slightly newer feature that we added, I think last October, in our scheduler and reminders. So I wonder if we could pause just for a moment on what it's like to set schedules and reminders for our learners.
All right, so we created this one on making a leather cohort. And so this is the cohort that's going to go through this. And right now we have a welcome and then what is leather? And maybe Christian is also going to do a live Zoom session, right? Where,
Yes.
what do you want to call it? Meet the group in
Yeah,
a
sure.
live
That's great.
session.
Seems right for a first lesson.
All
And
right.
actually, many of you probably got one of these custom written reminders about an hour ago.
All right, so we have all of that in here. And now once we have this, we can actually switch now to teach, which you all are very familiar with doing. So now we're in the role of teaching. We have that hat on. And if you all are like us, often people lose their Zoom links, right? And so maybe I need to remind them 3 days out, 5 minutes out, because they're going to lose it in their email inbox. So what we do is we click on schedule right here. And there are a lot of options for you. So Christian, when would you like to have this session?
Yeah, let's do it next Wednesday, the 28th.
Okay.
And one of the really cool things that you can do now in your cohort, if you don't know this already, is actually to customize reminders. So through Ed Labs, we run a lot of different experiments with people teaching all kinds of things online to figure out how we can create an inviting, engaging environment. One of the most effective ways I've found to do this over the last year is simply customizing these reminders, and maybe even more simply, just customizing the subject line. You can think of it almost like benevolent clickbait. We all know how annoying clickbait is, right? It's that. And the reason why it's annoying is because somebody tries to pull you in, right, with some kind of quippy or engaging question or title, but then the meat of it, the body of the article, doesn't actually pay off. I call it benevolent clickbait because ideally, when your learner hops into the lesson, it actually pays off, which feels weird and good online. So we could just maybe come up with some kind of question or some kind of statement here, even something just a little bit funny, like join this meeting to avoid leatherworking injuries or something like that. I've actually cut my thumb so many times in the last year that it's pretty accurate.
I would join this one. And then
Yeah.
you can see right here, it's automatically going to pull in my first name. So that way it feels like this was written to me. And it says, here's a reminder that this live session is happening soon, and includes that link. Now, the thing is, you can tell already that I set this to go 3 days before this happens, but I can actually add another one. So what might be another reminder that you would want to add in?
Yeah, I'm actually teaching a class on poetry right now. And one of the things I love to do is just send out a little reminder like 10 minutes before a Zoom call or a live chat discussion, and just say something like, we're excited to see you there.
And on this one, you could actually put that Zoom link right here, just so they see it automatically when it's in their email and can link in and go to it. So you can customize that. A few things to also highlight, you can say right up here who it's going to and when, but I can say this is going to go to all of those who have completed something. So Christian, what's an example of maybe a reminder that you would send for someone who's actually completed a step?
Yeah, we'll talk about this more in some of our follow-up sessions, but I think one of the really important things whenever we're thinking about communication with our cohort is, one, to make encouragement primary, and two, to make guilt the enemy. I'm actually going to leave those two principles just sitting right there. If you want to talk more about those, we can set up an Ed Lab session and talk about how they play out in your particular school.
All right, so we've covered scheduler and reminder, and how you can customize that for each cohort. So again, that accountability is in there, which leads us right to the next one.
Yeah, personalization. So let's talk about how we can personalize our cohorts. This is a really important thing. Paul, I know that you very often say that the best version of the course that you're teaching is the one that you're teaching right now. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that statement. If you're a teacher, you know that there's this special kind of blend of excitement, right? When you get your learners together and you finally get going through all the material, and it spurs on new ideas. You say, oh, like I've been teaching this for a decade, but what if I did this? What if I introduced this first? What if instead of having a video call, we actually have a chat discussion, whatever it might be? Cohorts puts that kind of personalization at the forefront. So let's even just talk about a few ideas for how we can personalize our cohorts.
Okay, so you have these learning events, which those could be like you were talking about, the attend step, the Zoom meeting, the Google Meets meeting, or even like the discussion feed like you were talking about doing.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite ideas. So recently I was teaching this poetry class, like I mentioned, and I don't know if you're like me, but I think teachers get very often overly ambitious, especially when a new course is starting. And we just want to go all out and have all kinds of meetings. So I was thinking at first that I could just have the class meet every Sunday on a Zoom call, not really thinking fully about how high intensity that would be, the kind of Zoom fatigue that people are feeling. So really quickly in my cohort, I actually adapted. And instead of having a Zoom call every week, I real quick switched half of my attend steps from a Zoom meeting to just a live Pathwright discussion. So everybody hops in the same learning step at the same time, and we talk in a threaded Pathwright discussion step. What was great about that is it lowers the vulnerability threshold. It's much easier to join a chat discussion than a Zoom discussion. And I found tons of engagement. Actually, I kicked off the cohort with one of these live Pathwright threaded discussions. People hadn't met each other yet, and 7 out of 10 people joined. And within 45 minutes, we had 57 responses in this discussion thread. So I was able to recognize the needs of that particular cohort and customize the material for them. But let's talk about a few other ideas for how we might customize our cohort.
All right, so we also have bonus steps that you might add in. So this could be something like adding in additional projects if people need a little more practice, or maybe you have a beginner, maybe actually it's like another company and you want to add in custom welcomes for that particular company that's going through your source content.
Yeah, I love that. Or like this idea of personalizing to interest. So if you realize that maybe your learners were being a little bit too hard on themselves and they self-assessed at a lower skill level than they actually are, we could actually add in some custom projects, some more rigorous projects, some more difficult projects just for that group of learners. Or we could just run a little test. And this is really this idea of creative iteration, that we want to, again, notice and connect and adapt for our cohort in real time. So we could just try things out, maybe run an experiment a slightly different way. If you've used Pathwright for a while, I imagine that maybe us talking about this customization might be bringing up a little bit of anxiety. If
Have
you're
a slight panic
familiar,
attack over there.
yeah, if you're familiar with the relationship between source and cohorts, you might be feeling a little bit anxious. Is that accurate? Maybe just chat in, give me a raised hand. So, Paul, I'm going to tag you in, and I want to talk with you just about one of the bigger improvements that we've snuck into this cohort season, which is this idea of syncing.
All right. Yeah. So basically, we have it here at the top that cohorts, in a way, are also the world's longest beta test, not just our best kept secret feature. And part of the reason for that is because I know many of you have probably experienced this when you are customizing cohorts, especially if a bunch of people are iterating and being creative with what they're doing specifically with their cohorts. Well, then it's very hard to keep the source path in sync with all that, especially if there's many of them happening at once. And again, the best version of your course is whatever's being taught right now. So one of the reasons that we kind of kept cohort secret is because of that particular snag, where keeping all of them in sync and being able to iterate while also keeping this core version was just a little too difficult. But
Yeah,
we are happy.
Liam and Sandy are talking about it right now. And actually, Heather just chimed in. So it feels confusing to know, am I editing in the cohort? Am I editing in the source? Oh, no, I just edited in the cohort and I meant to edit in the source, right? Syncing solves that issue. So, Michelle, why don't we hop into some of the stuff that we've just made and figure out how we can sync things up? So if you'll remember, we created this summer cohort, right? We didn't create our material in the source path. But let's say, Michelle, that after I teach this, I decide, actually, I want to make this curriculum. I'm going to teach this seasonally. I'm going to do a fall making a leather wallet cohort. So how could I move all of these changes in the cohort to my source path?
So a couple of things first is you'll notice that I have the sync button. So instead of a publish right there, it now says sync. And so if I click on this, I'm given a couple of options. So now I can sync everything that we built out for Christian's leather making course. I can sync it back to just the summer cohort to make that available for those people who are actually taking this. And look, you can actually see now it's telling me what I've added. And so as soon as I click sync to cohort, this is now available for those learners who are going through that cohort. But now that we are ready to offer this to the fall group, I also have this option to sync it back to the source path. So if I click this, I can now push all of those changes to that source and offer that now to all the other cohorts that are going through this. So
let's hop into our new source path to show off this new design. So here's another big but subtle change. From now on, the source path is going to have its own distinct background, which means that there's no longer confusion around whether I'm editing in the source or I'm editing in the cohort. So combined with this new source path background and the ability to sync between my source and my cohorts, there's no more confusion around where my content is going to end up.
And you'll see that dotted background when you're in the actual path and also when you're in an individual step. So it'll always let you know where you are. Now, if I came to the source again, and let's say I make a change, the change I tend to like to make is adding in an exclamation. Like we should have been a little more excited about saying welcome. And maybe we could have actually decided like, I want every cohort to feel like my content is personalized for them. So I'm just going to use one of these hidden little tools that's in Pathwright where I can do this little simple bracket thing and pull in the first name of any learner who is going through this, publish this, and see how it says this is now going out to all source and cohort paths. So it's very easy to know then where you are updating everything. You can see I can now sync this to all those cohorts. But now let's flip back to that cohort that we were working on and make a change there, just so you can see if I make even one change, I can actually push that back to the cohort because that is the best iteration of my content. So let's say we already added in this one where Christian was talking about doing that live discussion step. Maybe right before this, he realized that maybe he should do a to-do of set up your workshop. So then you could actually answer their questions. I need to add some content in here first. So we're just going to add some pretend text on concrete. All right, so that's there. And as soon as I go up here, it shows that I have that one sync that I can push back to that. And I can uncheck what I do not want to be sent back.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things here too is that in the past, it was easy to accidentally publish something that didn't have any content, but that's no longer the case. So now we're going to help you out by making sure that every step that you publish has content in it before it goes live. So your learners are never stuck with an empty step. So Michelle, I think let's go ahead and move on to that third and final pillar of cohorts, which is community, which I'm really excited about.
Okay, so the next one, here we go, community. So the whole thing that we've been talking about is learning online can be lonely, but how do we make that better? And why is actually learning together better, Christian?
Yeah, I think, and I'd love to hear, Paul, some of your answers. I know you speak really well on this. I think that whenever we learn together, there's some positive peer pressure that happens, but we're also helped by other people's perspective or maybe other people voicing questions that we don't always feel comfortable voicing. And when you get all of those different aspects of community together, whenever you're looking at the same thing together, but from a different perspective, it exponentially magnifies whatever we're learning together.
Yeah, and I think that's really the magic of what the difference between a cohort and a course is. And that's even true in real life. And I think one way to think about it is learning through content, through like a really well-designed course, is basically making connections with ideas. But learning with people is actually making connections to people and their ideas. And so there's this kind of exponential thing that happens when you just get one other person, especially if they're eager to learn along with you, and you have a teacher or a mentor in the room as well. There's something exponentially different that happens. And I think that's why this community area is so important. And just a note here, you'll see that some of these things are marked as beta, and we'll show you what they look like. But this is, like Christian said at the beginning, the season is beginning now, and we're going to be enhancing all these community features and other things around cohorts over the summer.
So Michelle, let's real quick dive into some of these changes on the community tab. If you've hung out in Pathwright for a while, you know that in the past, the community tab on your path has really only done one thing. It's aggregated discussion that's going on in individual steps. Now it's a lot more. So Michelle, why don't you walk us through these three new areas of community that we've got?
So the first thing is that as a learner, not only can I respond to the discussion questions that the teacher or whoever has posted for me to respond to in here, I can also come under the community tab and decide to start a discussion right here. So maybe I wanted to say, for example, where would you recommend going on lunch break? There we go. So I can post that, and all of the other learners who are in this cohort can help respond to that, and they'll be able to see that. And so another thing that you'll see is there's now a new members tab as well under this community. And before I jump there, you can also sort all of these discussions. So I can say, let's go look at the most recently posted, the most upvoted, all of those. Previously, when I was taking a course that I was not comfortable with the subject and I felt like a new learner in it, I wasn't, I guess you could say, brave enough to start posting my own discussion questions, but I basically lived in the discussion area, listening to what everybody else was saying. So that's one good use for this. The other thing is members. And if I go under members, this looks a little more like a yearbook, which lets me see who the learners are in here.
So if you've been in Pathwright for a while, again, you know that you've always been able to upload a picture and you've always been able to upload a bio. Now your learners are actually able to see who each other is. Again, it creates that sense that I'm not alone in this, but I'm actually learning with other people. We're going to be enhancing a lot of these features. So a couple of things to note is that in that discussion tab, we're soon going to be adding the idea of topics. So you'll be able to create different categories and topics around discussion happening. We're going to enhance some communication features on this members tab as well. But for now, it just goes a long way to actually know that I'm not alone in this course. I'm maybe
And
most
then,
excited about activity though.
but before jumping there, you might also notice that while you're on members, you're going to see this invite group. Because one thing that we heard from feedback from a lot of people was that when you're thinking about adding people to the cohort to work together, you're thinking about inviting them to the community, the learning community. So now that invite tab is here, but I can also see it at the very top whenever I'm on my path. So
I
we
actually
just
didn't
make
even
sure
know
that
that
it's,
that existed, Michelle. You're teaching me.
yeah, it's
That's
right there.
new
I
as
learned
of
it.
yesterday.
It's
Okay,
new. So
that's
Chris,
why.
yeah,
That's
it's
why, yep.
no worries. It's there. Another thing too is whenever I click this is where I can now, instead of having multiple invite tabs, it makes it so it's easy to just say, okay, I'm going to do this link. And now I can choose who the person is I'm trying to invite right here.
Awesome.
All right. So now the activity feed.
If you've been an admin in Pathwright, you've seen something like this for your entire school, but now every path has its own activity feed that learners and teachers and moderators only in that cohort get to see, which really creates this sense of momentum and activity around what's happening in the path.
Well, and it helps you to see related to this that this is somewhere you also want to be because there are other people there. So
Yeah.
maybe you see when some people that you like having discussions are actually active. And so you make a point to be there as well.
Right now, we're seeing a lot of discussion because in this cohort, there was recently a lot of discussion, but you can sort this as well. It's going to show step completions, it'll show discussions, it'll show registrations. So you can filter this view a little bit better.
I had nobody complete this course, so no one showed up as completed.
Well, they're in progress. We'll give them
They're
some
in
time.
progress.
Maybe
We'll give
write
them
some
a little
reminders.
slack. Yeah.
Okay, so these have been a lot of the new features in Pathwright. I want to talk now about where we're going next and how we can follow up together. And then we're going to move to some Q&A.
All right, coming up next.
So again, and we'll just reiterate it for the third time, this is really a starting line today. So we're going to be making a lot of new improvements to these features. So with that note, let's talk about how we can follow up. So one of these is Ed Labs. Ed Labs are free one-on-one design sessions that you can schedule up to once a week with me. So they're not focused on technical questions about Pathwright or necessarily feature questions. We're really answering the question, how can you teach what you're teaching in the best way using Pathwright and on or offline? Paul, do you want to talk to the cohort and community enhancements and where we're headed with that?
Yeah, so you'll see the enhancements that we just showed, the member directory, the activity feed, the new discussion feed. And once we launch it to production, so one note here, you'll have the option to turn the community features on or off. Because in some cases, you may not want the member directory to be public for every cohort. So you'll have the option to do that. And then we'll be iterating on those community features over the summer. So we've always enjoyed hearing your feedback. I recognize many of you in the chat as having given us really great feedback in the past. As you try these features out with your cohorts, definitely share with us what would be helpful for you. And we will be iterating and improving all of those community features over the summer.
Paul, why don't you give us a little taster of what season 2 is going to be?
Right. Okay. So we do have a mysterious season 2 coming up at the end of the year. So this is our very first season. Our second one is planned for the fall around mid-September. And season 2 is focused around this theme of mentorship. And so I won't say much more than that, other than it's going to offer a whole new way to teach on Pathwright in addition to everything we're doing with the cohorts.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to some Q&A.
Great, and we've already got some good questions in the Q&A, but also we'll be looking at the public Q&A if you want to post those there, if you have another question that we haven't answered.
Were you going to answer Steve's?
Yeah, it looks like Mark already did. So yeah, asking how I am in this floating circle. And actually, you can do a lot of cool things with this. I can move the circle around, use a pointer, change the background. There's all kinds of cool things you can do with this little tool. It's called mm-hmm.
It's
And
my
we actually
favorite.
really,
Paul's like, have you been using mm-hmm?
yeah, the name of it is pretty funny. That's the real name. Mm-hmm. And we love it because, or I love it just because it's a great way for teaching. You can do all kinds of cool things with slides and you can have a pointer. So it feels a little bit more like having a whiteboard or a projector or something like in front of a class than just vanilla Zoom does. And Bert had a question in the Q&A about topics. So like having categorical topics in community. And Mark answered this too, but just to answer it live for everybody, that is something that we are actually working on already. And so as we enhance those cohort community features, just stay tuned for topics, because that's something that's coming.
Paul, someone had a question. I think this is actually pretty good. Brian was asking what the difference is between publishing on a step and syncing to a path.
Oh yeah, so that is something that can be a little confusing. So let me show here on my screen. I create a new step here in this path, and then I go here and I click into the content. I'll add something. You'll notice I actually have two little dots here, okay? So up here in the corner is the sync option. And so what that does is that's going to sync the path changes. So new steps, new lessons, reorders, changes to points, things like that. It's going to change that and it's going to sync those with
Paul,
the, yeah.
1 second. Michelle, can you stop sharing? And Paul, can you share?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry
Great.
everybody. Okay, so we've got two options here. So one is to sync the changes to the path. So those are like any step changes. Let's see, we've got an edited step here, we've got an added step, and we could sync those to the cohort, or we could sync all the changes we've made subsequently back to the source path. Now that's path related. Now everything in the content area, so what I'm doing right here, one way to think about this is it's kind of like I'm writing a blog post for a website. And when I publish it, so it doesn't use the term sync intentionally now, but when I publish that, that's going to go live immediately to anybody who has access to this content. So content publishing works differently than the path syncing. We do plan also to make it so that you could actually version your content. So if you wanted a special version of, say, this content for a particular cohort, you could do that too. But the right way to think about it, though, is anything you change with your content and use that publish button to publish, that's just like publishing a blog post and putting it out there, and operates differently than the syncing works.
Awesome.
So hopefully that's helpful.
Randy asked a good question about roles involved in these new features and how syncing shows up for different roles. So teachers will be able to sync the changes that they make to their particular cohort, but teachers won't be able to sync changes up to the source. So you won't run into an issue of a rogue teacher saying everybody should teach it this way and syncing everything up to the source or anything like that. The only people who will be able to sync up to the source are admins, library editors, or course editors. Am I right on that, Paul?
Yes, that is correct. So basically anybody who has access to that design tab is somebody who can sync or make changes to the content and publish those. But if they don't, if they're like just a moderator or they're a teacher only on one cohort, they can only change what's in their path, but not sync back to the source.
And just to build on that, if you build out all of your course content and you have other teachers using it, oftentimes there's like a 80-20 rule where they want to use 80% of your content, but still customize it just for their learners by adding in their unique welcomes, their own live sessions, things like that. So being able to have that ability to personalize.
Like Amber has a question here too. So good question, Amber. Basically, who can see the Teach tab? So we just talked about who can see the Design tab, but the Teach tab, which helps people keep up with what needs feedback and things like that, and see where everybody is at in the top. Basically, if you have a teacher role or you have a moderator role, then you can see the Teach tab, and you can use all the tools on the Teach tab. You can message your group up here. You can invite people to join your cohort. And of course, admins can see everything. So if you're an admin or an editor, you can see every mode. But if you only have somebody who's teaching, they're not actually designing content, they're not responsible really for the content directly, then the moderator and teacher roles are what you're looking for there. Now, we're also going to have a guide, an updated guide just thoroughly explains like all the roles and the differences and the different modes and stuff like that too. So stay on the lookout for that. We'll be sharing that with you this week.
Paul, we've got two other good questions, one from Bert and one from Dwayne. Bert's question, is there a way to create libraries of documents, links to videos, and related learning objects for post-course reference by learners? We don't really have a content repository in Pathwright. We're not set up that way, but the path is pretty easily viewable after you complete the course. So your learner can go back, unless you restrict access, your learner can go back and review that content. We don't recommend creating a content repository like that. They tend not to be used really well, and they're not actually great for learning. But Bert, it might be good for you and I to talk about some of that through an Ed Lab session. And then Dwayne's question, so to be clear, when I see or hear the word cohort, I should think in terms of course, path, lesson. A cohort is pretty simply just a group of people who are taking something together.
Yeah, and so behind the scenes, what's happening, and I think, in the source path, basically this is your kind of best version currently. You can now sync back from cohort. So anything you liked that somebody did or you did in a particular cohort, you can sync it back to keep this in the source. And then anytime you would create a new cohort, it's just going to use that path by default, but then it can be customized further on its own. So a cohort is just a group of people going around their own version of a path.
Right now, that's primarily that your cohort is taking a path together. We do really love the idea, though, of having a cohort forward course without necessarily having a lot of content that they're learning together. So just a group of people who are exploring an idea together. Really, if your learners kind of get close enough, they eventually no longer need the scaffolding of a path and kind of launch off on their own and just want to explore and discuss and share together, which is really cool. Any other questions?
Got a lot of great questions so far. So thanks everybody for leaving those. Christian, do you want to talk about the?
Yeah, excited to use these together with you. We learn from when you teach. We learn from teaching with you. So I hope, again, that this is really just a start of all of us collaborating together, using these new features to reach learners in new ways. If you've got questions, more technical questions about these features, again, feel free to email us and we're happy to discuss and answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much again for joining this. This has been phenomenal. It's felt like a reunion, and it's really great to feel your energy and excitement around this. We're excited to use these features with you and see you at our next premiere in a few months.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Great seeing you.